Yeah, I am definitely advocating for a moratorium. I think our first step is honestly just to stop donating. I was actually walking the property and found all of these acorns. And mashallah, there are so many of them. But these are actually what's left over from the winter. So they're kind of useless. They're grubby and they're moldy. But the fact that they're still out here, even after the winter, it really suggests what an abundant and completely underutilized resource acorns are. I mean, this was a staple of California's indigenous people. This was their corn. This was their wheat, gluten-free, high in protein. But there's a little bit of a caveat because you can't just pull acorns off of oak trees and start snacking on them. They're loaded with tannins or tannic acid, which is, if you've ever let your black tea sit too long and it gets kind of astringent and puckery, that's tannic acid. And enough of that, you get sick. So really what you need is 3 things to prepare your acorns. And we're not going to talk about specifics. This is definitely not an instructional video on how to prepare acorns, but conceptually, what you need is knowledge. You need to know what you're looking for and how to make use of it. You need responsibility because you want to be able to do this correctly. And bigger than that, you want to be taking advantage of the resources that you have around you. And then finally, accountability, especially if you're going to be preparing the acorns for other people, because if you don't do it right, you risk harming others. And there might be one more thing to kind of consider, and that's this element of what I'll call militant stewardship. That is to say, to recognize that these oak groves, now this is mostly pine out here, but down a little bit further, we got some oak trees. Those groves had to be protected. It takes something like 20 years before an oak tree is going to start producing. And so if you find a nice productive grove, what you and your people effectively need to do is protect that grove. You do so out of an awareness of just how precious this resource is. And through that sort of militant stewardship, you are fending off attacks from other groups, for example, that want to get at those precious resources. And there's an argument to be made that the agricultural developments that followed, for example, the hunter-gatherer ethic that had people stumbling across an oak grove and settling in to make use of those resources and to protect them, there's an argument to be made that the agricultural model that followed is fundamentally predicated on a kind of weakness. Well, why is that? Because if you did not have the capacity, if you did not have the strength of body and spirit to protect that grove, the best you could do is make off with a handful of seeds and go plant it somewhere. And that's sort of what we do. We plant seeds and we harvest them because we lack the vitality and the sense of purpose to protect and make use of what is already there. But before we can develop that sense of militant stewardship of existing resources, we need to identify what the resources actually are. And there's a very persistent myth about the American Muslim community that we are somehow more educated and affluent than the wider American public. And it's just not true. Pew Research has demonstrated empirically that American Muslims are 3 times more likely to be out of a job and looking for work. And that's something that I feel like the Muslim nonprofit sector completely ignores in their incessant request for handouts and donations. We do have resources though. And among those resources is the fact that immigrant Muslims in America do tend to be more educated than the general American public. We tend to be younger overall, and we have more children. And so that gives us 3 really important and completely underutilized resources. First of all, that immigrant community is going to bring with them an out-of-the-box thought process. They're going to see things differently by virtue of their culture and upbringing, which is in many ways different than those of us who have been born and raised here. Secondly, we've got that youthful energy. We're younger than the larger, broader, wider American public, and so we can take advantage of that youthful energy to create and advance new ideas. And finally, we have more kids, which means we actually have a future that we're working towards. We have progeny that we want to see doing better than ourselves. So these are our resources. How do we leverage those resources to support the abundance that we want to generate in support of the initiatives that these nonprofit organizations set themselves up to address? You do know that society is fixing to collapse, right?
Yeah.
You know that. It's absolutely true. That was going to be bad. There was a paper that was written back in 1975 at MIT, and really it was just an evaluation of, how it is that an economic system predicated on limitless growth, how that was supposed to square with the reality that we live in a world with finite resources. And obviously it's untenable in the long term. And there is consensus that we're reaching the limits of that model based on the limits of those resources, 2030, 2040. Everything you're seeing in global economics, in global politics should be understood as that sort of like final terminal cash grab and fleecing of the sort of ignorant public. That's what's going on. And so identifying our resources is so critical. Making use of those resources in creative, strategic ways to the benefit of our community, also super critical. By the way, it's not just about Muslims supporting Muslims. We create models for the larger world. That's kind of what our place is. We're not really talking about new ideas, maybe just new applications of old ideas. Put plainly, we're just talking about marginalizing, minimizing the impulse to develop religious nonprofits as a way of meeting communal needs, and thinking instead in terms of building communal wealth through the establishment and support of American Muslim businesses. And it's something that's been done before. It's not like a brand new idea. In fact, the American black nationalist movements that we're going to be talking about in a second is really worth looking into. But I got to get back to the house. So can I catch you down there? Is that cool?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'll see you over there. So I've been looking into this. And black American nationalist movements have been incredibly successful with their economic innovation. No more so than the Nation of Islam, which the Orthodox Muslim community really doesn't like to consider beyond its relationship with Malcolm X and the schism there. We like to claim him as our own while disparaging the Nation of Islam as a sort of religious heresy, which, fine, okay, it's a heresy. I love heretics, because heretics, they're pushing against the grain. They're thinking differently than the mainstream society that they find themselves in, and they're really not afraid to push boundaries. So Elijah Muhammad, he's the guy that started this, and I'm gonna read this. This is from the National Museum of African American History and Culture. From its inception in Detroit in 1930, the Nation of Islam, NOI, promoted economic self-reliance for African Americans. In 1964, the organization initiated a 3-year economic plan, leading to individual and NOI ownership of farmland and nationwide commercial establishments that included a national food production and distribution network with delivery trucks, restaurants, and supermarkets. Its Your Supermarket brand fostered a sense of ownership and pride in patrons who intentionally supported businesses owned and operated by African Americans. By 1970, dress shops, barber shops, clothing factories, and bakeries provided goods and services to Muslims and non-Muslims. From 1960 to 1975, the Muhammad Speaks newspaper, sold on busy street corners, was among the most profitable of these enterprises. In 1974, the NOI established its International Trades Division, importing whiting fish from Peru and selling it door to door in African American neighborhoods. These businesses employed inner city residents in a wide variety of full-time and part-time jobs. That is incredible. Now, From the website blackpast.org, we learned a little bit more about the early capital for these projects, which was generated through a kind of tithing. The 3-year economic plan required NOI members who could afford to do so to pledge 1/10 to 1/3 of their income to economic development. Members were also required to patronize NOI-owned businesses or to open their own economic enterprises, which would be advertised in Muhammad Speaks, the NOI's official newspaper. So let's compare that, right, to the current state of American Muslims. We are content to assume wealth rather than build it. And to some extent, the assumption is valid. In the Quran, this is the 3rd chapter, 27th verse. It says, "You cause the night to enter the day, and you cause the day to enter the nights, and you bring the living out of the dead, and you bring the dead out of the living." This is the key point. "And you," referring to God, "you give provision to whom you will without measure." So yes, God provides, but he also exercises discretion in how much and to whom he's going to provide for. But the religious nonprofit sort of philosophical basis is around identifying disparities and then addressing those largely through appeals to the moneyed public to then transfer that wealth to people that are understood to be in need. But regarding that first point, the 11th chapter of the Quran, the 6th verse, God says, "There is no living creature that does not receive sustenance from God." He knows its dwelling and its resting place. Everything is recorded in a glorious book. So we get what we get, man. And if what we're allotted doesn't square with what we think we should get, maybe the first thing we need to do is adjust those expectations. Now, if there's some oppression or injustice that we correlate with these disparities, then yes, absolutely, it's our responsibility as Muslims to address that injustice, to dismantle the oppressive operations that are preventing people from their due. God references this in the 16th chapter of the Quran, 97th verse, where he says, "Whoever works righteousness, whether a believing male or female, indeed, we will give a good life, and we shall recompense them certainly with a reward commensurate with the best of what they used to do." So God promises to provide for those who do good work. Now, Islamic nonprofits will leverage that maxim to convince us that we should hand them our wealth in order for them to sort of distribute in whatever manner they see fit. But I see something different here. There's a kind of transactional a quality to the verse. God provides for those who do X, Y, and Z. That should help us reconcile whatever misgivings we might have in our own consciousness about asking payments for goods and services. I think if we understand that, and if we internalize it, and if we make peace with that based on God effectively owning that model within the Quran, that we then can restore the merchant as the rightful redistributor of wealth in our community. How so? The honest merchant creates high quality items, high quality services, excellent. And that appeals to perhaps the moneyed segments of society who then trade their cash for those goods and services. Now the merchant is in a position to redistribute that wealth either directly or perhaps through leveraging some nonprofit. And this is key. We are not arguing for the elimination of religious nonprofits. We are saying that we need to question the model. Yeah, I am definitely advocating for a moratorium. I think our first step is honestly just to stop donating. Bro, do you know, we just finished up the 9th lunar month of Ramadan. And I made myself a promise. Every single Muslim organization that has a mailing list that I'm subscribed to, if they sent me a request for donations, I was just going to unsubscribe. That's what I did. Yeah. Do you know how many Islamic mailing lists I'm currently subscribed to?
0.
Zero, none. There was not a single Muslim organization that I had previously demonstrated some interest or curiosity about that didn't hit me up for a donation. Like that is rapacious. Like that's unforgivable. I think we need to normalize expecting something for our money. If you're passionate about feeding the people of Bangladesh, there's been a war, a natural disaster, people are going hungry, and this means something to you, find a way to manage it without asking me to give you the money. You can open up a store. You can pay the people of Bangladesh a living, sustainable wage to either procure or produce those goods that you will then sell to the American public, both non-Muslim as well as Muslim. You're going to create a new market for those people. You're going to address their hunger through the provision of a livable wage. But not only that, if you do your job well, remind you, this is your passion. If you're going to do that well, you're going to profit, God willing, enough that you can then kick some of your profits over to sort of meet the short-term need of putting food on the table then and there. So the second step is to create those businesses that will support the needs that we've identified. So first thing, stop donating. Second thing, create and support high quality, ethically motivated businesses. And there are some corporate models that support this. There's something called a certified B corporation. There's something called a social purpose corporation. Go ahead and look them up. Basically, they incentivize some kind of service aspect to the work. And if you want an example of this, here's a company that's way ahead of the curve, Wäbry Syrup. We'll put a link in the description. I know this family personally. They manufacture these wonderful flavored syrups, really high quality ingredients. But not only that, when you buy their product for your use, there's some portion of the profits that are earmarked for orphans around the world. This is not a new or revolutionary idea. We're just not scaling it. We are so content to move to that nonprofits model where we simply ask for handouts. And it's ridiculous. Dustin Tribe, if we can sort of toot our own horn, that's something we can do. Yeah. So we're a little lazy when it comes to paperwork. We're an LLC, right? A limited liability corporation. But the Camp One homestead, we are on land that was historically stewarded by the Nishinan people. And so we do have an arrangement with them that a portion of revenue that we generate through our work is earmarked for the land back initiatives of the Nishinan people. So if that's something that excites you, feel free to sign up to any of our events. We'll have a link to that in the description as well. Our third step, once we've sort of achieved critical mass with an abundance of American Muslim businesses that we've created and that we're supporting, businesses operating at the highest levels of excellence and ethical management, once we've done that and we've started to generate a significant amount of wealth within our communities, we need to think about how we can portion some of that wealth and dedicate it to the creation and growth of a venture capital fund, something that is managed. I don't know the exact way to do this, but the idea is we need to be able to seed, invest, mentor future generations of business owners. Remember, one of our assets is the fact that we tend to have more children than the American public at large. That's a future that we need to be considering, that we need to provide for. And the fourth thing is we really need to question nonprofit redundancy. We're not arguing for the elimination of nonprofits. I hope we made that clear. But we need to be thinking critically about the proliferation of this model, which belies a terrible lack of imagination, creativity, and resource management. How many international relief organizations do we need? How many mosques do we need? Does it make sense to sort of invest in these complexes that can host 2,000 people on a Friday and they're empty the other 6 days of the week? We can decentralize that. We can actually avoid all of the overhead, all of the administrative fees, all of the headaches associated with the board and parking and all of that, and normalize a Friday prayer that has 30, 40, 50 congregants hosted in private residences. There's no reason we couldn't do that. And there might even be an argument to be made that it's a way better use of our resources. And speaking of resources, actually, time is one of them, and I need to get to work. So this whole thing started with a a consideration of the acorn and just how it's a totally underutilized resource. And then you have to ask yourself, why is it underutilized? And the reality is there's no good reason except that we have sort of blindly accepted the current model that's in vogue. We're starting to recognize that the models that exist have huge problems. And that's really the attitude that I would like us to have with regards religious nonprofits. There are limits and problems with the model, and we need to be more creative about how we're thinking about funding the services that we would like to provide while at the same time building wealth in our community. Time is running out to do it, and I think we need to start doing it as soon as possible. Oh, by the way, for all of you new to the channel, thank you so much for subscribing. Really appreciate it. I know we spent a lot of time talking about the specific needs, realities of the American Muslim community, but I think some of this stuff has wider applicability. And if there's anything that you would like to share about what I've said, the comments is a great place to do that. We do have a Discord you can jump into if you want to do that as well. And if you want to hang out on the trail or elsewhere, check out our events. I look forward to seeing you next time. Assalamu alaikum.